Okay, it's recording, but yeah, we didn't have that.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to be presenting today on special events and recreation risk. This is the time of year when we start planning and preparing for those great events that we host throughout the summertime. This is probably one of the things that we enjoy doing. Some of you may say, "Yeah, I don't enjoy that at all. It's a lot of stress and it's hard work." But this is probably one of the cooler things that we do as local governments around the state, is we host these great special events that happen. Some have gone on for literally hundreds of years, and people look forward to these each year. This is something, and I'm going to allow this video to play in the background as I talk just for a few minutes. This is a video from one of our local communities out there, just a small town that each year hosts a 24th of July celebration. And this is a video that they posted up on social media after their event was over, and I thought it was just interesting. This was a promotional thing for them. Hey, see what a great thing we did. Let's just see if there's anything risky as I'm talking there. So these are one of the funnest things and the coolest things that we do as an organization, but they also expose us to greater risk than almost anything else that we do on an annual basis. You look at this little town, probably just has a couple thousand residents, and on this one day, they bring several thousand people to their community to go through this. They bring airplanes and they drop stuff out of the airplanes, and just a number of things that they do throughout this celebration that could potentially get them into trouble. Okay. Here's the challenge. If we're not prepared, if we haven't thought through what these events are, we could have something really serious happen. And you look at this, something as simple, hey, we got a bouncy house and it's got water at the bottom, and we're throwing some toddlers into that. What could go wrong in that situation? There's plenty of stuff that could happen. The dunk tank, and if I allow this to go on further, this community also brings the fire engines out and they spray firefighting foam out on all the children out on the soccer field. What's the risk to that? Well, I don't know what all of that is, but there's definitely potential to have some problems. So how do we go about avoiding catastrophes that could happen? How do we make the best of the events that we host each year? And that's really what we're going to talk about today. And probably the most important thing is to start thinking about it right now or even earlier and planning for those things, plan for risk. We want to plan the funnest, most exciting events we can. We've got to plan for risks. All right. So these are the things we'll talk about. I'm going to go quickly because we do have a lot to talk about today. Liability. Basically, that's being responsible for something. And how do we sue and how do we get sued and lose? We have to owe a duty to somebody. We have to breach that duty, and that breach is the proximal cause of injury that happens to that person. And so basically, an easy way to think about that is if we install sidewalks in our city, we incur a duty to maintain those sidewalks. And if we have an uplift in the sidewalk, I've got an uplift a couple inches high, I probably have breached that duty, and somebody walking along there doesn't see that. They're walking in low light or whatever. They trip and fall and break their nose or break some bone. Injury has occurred. Well, they got a pretty good opportunity to sue us. Can they win? Well, it kind of depends on what we've done and to protect ourselves, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. But that's the basics of liability. I owe a duty, and I breach that duty, and somebody gets injured from it, either from a physical or a financial standpoint. And just owning property, just having baseball fields, if you build it, finish the phrase, if you build it, they will sue. Just owning property, we incur some liability. Okay, liability exposure. Okay, so A duty is a legal obligation. There's a standard of reasonable care for pretty much everything that's out there, and we owe that to people who interact with us. If they come onto our property, whether it's a park, a stadium, a rodeo arena, whatever, we owe them a duty to have safe facilities. We owe somebody who pays us to come to those facilities more of a duty than somebody that trespasses. But to all of those, we owe a certain level of a duty. So when you're hauling stuff down the highway on your car, you throw a mattress on top of your roof and you don't tie it down very well and it flies off, you have breached your duty to adequately secure that load on your car and potentially could be responsible for damage to other people's vehicles out there. So have we met the standard of care? So we need to understand what our responsibility is when it comes to these events, where it comes to our baseball fields, our soccer fields, stadiums, and all those things that where the public interacts with us. Okay, and in some cases these can be legal requirements. Sometimes they're consensus standards. So thinking of things like a grandstand or bleachers, there is a consensus standard out there that says this is how your bleachers should be constructed. This is how we should renovate if we're going to take some old bleachers and try to bring them quote unquote up to code. This is how we have to do it. So there is a standard for that, and our manufacturers will set a standard for us by putting out an owner's manual. And if they say you have to do this to inspect and maintain the equipment, that's the standard we have to live up to. And if we're not, we may be breaching our duty. Okay? You say, well, we can't get sued. We're the government. Well, the reality is we can get sued. And how does that happen? State law says you can't make a claim, or you can't make a claim or recovery against a subdivision of the state. But the reality is it needs to be a governmental activity. What is that? Well, are our special events, do they fall within something that the government does? In most cases, they don't. Even there have been some cases where collection of sewage has been thrown out as a governmental activity. This is something that a private entity could do. There are some things that we're given special protections because they are inherent risk. This is inherently risky activity. If I ride a horse in a rodeo, everybody knows that's risky. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but some things have been specifically called out as inherently risky activities or dangerous activities. Okay, so how do we get sued as a governmental aid? How do we lose our immunity? Well, it's if let's read right here, except as may be otherwise provided, each governmental entity and each employee of governmental entity are immune from suit for any injury that results from exercise of a, I clicked my button too quick, exercise of a governmental function. Okay, so we're governmental function, except where injury is caused by a defective, unsafe, or dangerous condition of a public improvement, or injury proximately caused by a negligent act or omission of an employee within the scope of employment. So if we allow an unsafe condition to happen, or in here, dangerous, defective, unsafe, or dangerous, or because of the failure of ourselves or one of our employees or volunteers to do something or failure to do something, we can be held liable for that. So here's a quick example of that. Everybody likes rodeo, right? Rodeos are one of the activities that many of our organizations do during the year, and you say, "Wow, that's really risky stuff." If this cowboy gets bucked off of the horse and he's hung up in his rigging, whose fault is that? Well, the reality is it's his fault. He accepted that risk by climbing onto the back of that animal, knowing that was really risky activity. However, if he's hung up on that horse and he's being dragged around the rodeo arena, and our organization has allowed a bolt to stick out from the side of the fence or gates along there, and this guy is impaled by that bolt, guess what? we've allowed that dangerous condition to happen, and there's a chance that they can prevail against us in a lawsuit. So we need to be reasonable and prudent about what we do, and we need to be able to prove it. How do we prove it? Generally, we prove it through documentation. So let's go out and inspect our facilities and look for those dangerous or unsafe conditions. Let's have a plan that says how we're going to do these things, and then document it and show that we're doing it right. We've got to show that we're reasonable and prudent. Okay, so how do we avoid liability? Well, there's a few different ways. These are standard risk management practices: risk avoidance, risk retention, risk transference, and risk limitation, which basically means we own it, but we're going to do something about it. So there's a whole gamut of things, and let's run through those just quickly. The first one is risk avoidance. If I don't do the activity, if I don't skydive, I will not fall out of the sky and splatter on the ground under most circumstances, and I won't have the fun that goes along with that, but I will avoid that risk. It's not very much fun, but there are certain situations where we say, you know what, this is too risky for us. We're not going to do this. The next one is risk retention, where I say, okay, I'm doing it. I'm owning the risk on this. We're going to do this activity, and I own it. Okay. And in this picture, you can see where a harrow is leaned up against a fence at a baseball field. Well, that's a pretty simple thing, and probably the person that tipped it up there was doing so to make it so it wouldn't be a trip hazard. But in doing so, he created a potential fatal risk by tipping this harrow up, because a kid climbs up on that and it tips over, and they could be killed from doing that. And unfortunately, we've had similar situations where children have been killed, either in soccer goals or other things that have been propped up or not properly secured. And so we have to be aware of those things. If I don't identify this as a hazard, or if I do nothing about it, we own the risk. It's on us. Risk transference is a great technique to be able to give that risk to somebody else. Hand over the ticking time bomb to somebody else. And how do I do that? Well, generally this is a financial transaction, or at least a transaction of paper. We have to ask ourselves, who owns an event? In a lot of cases, we'll have things like a fun run, where there's a local organization, maybe a charity, that says, hey, we want to do a fun run in the city. We want the city to close off some streets, and we'll have this event. Well, there's going to be a question: who owns this event? Whose event is it? And if we can allow that other organization, here's the charity, have them own the event and give us some protection through their insurance policy, that's really a great scenario. We still get to do the event, but we distance ourselves from the risk. So how do we do that? Through indemnification agreements. That's where we talk about that paper transference, and certificates of insurance. What do I mean by that? Well, that means that we get a piece of paper, a certificate of insurance from a group or from a contractor that lists our organization as an additional insured. Okay, so they give us a piece of paper from their insurer that says XYZ organization, city, district, whatever you are, is indemnified or is protected under this certificate of insurance. It basically makes us a part of their insurance policy. So we get cover without exposing our assets. Okay. Risk transference, there's some specific language in that that we want to use when we do that. You definitely always want to talk to your legal counsel anytime you're engaging in contracts, but we do have some sample language that I will send out. We got to think about our limits as we're doing our events. We have to think about how big of a loss could we see in this. If we're having a craft fair and people are basically just walking through, looking at trinkets that people are selling or displaying, well, that has a lot less risk than something that involves feeding a large group of people, or maybe a demolition derby, or something that has an exceptional level of risk. And so we have to look at that and say, how do I have adequate coverage for that? All right. There are situations where, like we say, we bring in vendors, or somebody rents our facilities for a short amount of time. Say we have a group that comes in and they rent out our facilities, and they're going to do an event, a concert, something like that inside of one of our facilities. Well, we want to make sure that they have adequate coverage and that coverage protects us. How do you do that? Well, you just say, I need a certificate of insurance. And when they say, what? I don't know what you're talking about. Well, then we've got to get serious. Most event promoters will say, okay, what type of a certificate do you need? How much coverage? And who does it name on the certificate of insurance? And they know what they're talking about. However, we may have a local organization, a charity that really hasn't done much of this before. And sometimes even at our shows, we'll have vendors selling food, and we say you need to provide a certificate of insurance showing that you have coverage and that you're also covering us. Well, where does a family or another group that isn't doing this all the time, where do they get coverage? Well, there are various different options for that, and I've listed a few here, and none of these groups are a part of the trust, and we're not necessarily endorsing them. We've just seen that they provide short-term coverage for this type of a situation. FastCov is one where you can basically go online and buy a policy for one day. I can buy a general liability. I'm going to sell pickle on a stick at the county fair. And the county's going to require me to have a liability policy. You can buy a policy for 8 hours or 24 hours that will protect you from this specific risks associated with this specific activity. Okay, so, and I will send out the slides from this presentation after if you're interested in those. Okay, well, let's change gears just a little bit. What are some things that I worry about? I worry a lot about what people are doing. I worry about stock at the rodeos, but I worry about what people are doing in our facilities. If I own a dam, a spillway, are people out there sliding down the spillway? Are they putting up zip lines? Are they doing slack lines? We need to be aware of what's going on in our facilities. So I just want to get that out to start with. Let's pay attention to those things. We had a tragedy happen up at the Utah State University campus where some students had put out a slack line on Old Main Hill, which is a pretty steep hill, and they put this slack line between trees, and a cyclist was riding his bicycle down the hill and did not see the slack line between the trees. You ask what a slack line is. It's like a tightrope, but it's low to the ground. And it's not tight. It's kind of has some slack in it. Well, this guy's riding his bicycle down the hill, and he gets clotheslined, and unfortunately was fatally injured. He was killed there. There were lawsuits, and multiple entities paid out on this one. And you say, well, how did Utah State end up on the hook for that when somebody else was doing this? They were students. They were other. It wasn't a university-sponsored event. Well, it's on your property, and so we need to really be aware. That doesn't necessarily mean you're responsible, but we do have a duty to be aware of what's happening in our facilities and taking appropriate action if we see things that are outside of what is normal and appropriate at those facilities. And folks, just to remind you, if you've got questions or follow-ups on any of these things, type those into the chat box. Well, let's talk about events. We can pull off great events in Utah, and you do those each and every year. We even pulled off one of the biggest events in the world in the 2002 Winter Olympics, and I was fortunate enough to be involved with that as the risk manager over all of the mountain venues for the 2002 Olympics. And definitely, we had a lot of concerns going into that gigantic event, but we planned and we prepared, and that's really the key. There are always things that can happen, and we did have a few things happen, but in general, we had a lot less loss than could have happened, and we think our plans worked out really well. Of course, the weather cooperated in most of those scenarios, and I can tell you some stories about some things you never heard of. But in general, we did pretty well. And the same thing goes for all of our events and activities and leagues, athletic leagues, those things. But it just comes down to planning and preparing. One of the ways that we plan is starting early, getting our plans together. What is it that we're going to do? And let the trust know. If you have liability coverage with the trust, we need to know what type of events that you're planning during the year. So each year you get this liability application, and it has a section in here that asks about the different types of events, how big they are, what type of activities you're going to be doing. So then we have a heads up as to what types of things you may need coverage for. All right. Let's look at some questions here. We've been told by informal groups running clubs that because they are not a legal entity, they cannot purchase special event insurance for their fun run because there is no entity to insure. This was confirmed by an insurance company. Yeah, and you definitely need to be an organization. Here's my response to that. When a group like this comes to you and says, "Well, I can't get insurance," here's the reality for that group. If something bad happens at their event, who's on the hook? And the reality is it's the organizers. It's anybody that's associated with that group could be held personally liable for that. And so it's not our obligation, but I would have a conversation with that group and say, here's the deal. You are putting yourself at personal risk. Your home, your retirement, any savings that you have, you're putting that at risk by organizing this event. And you should create an entity, whether it's a corporation or whether it's a group. There will be a legal status, and they can talk to. There's all kinds of attorneys out there that could give them 5 minutes of legal advice on how to put that together. But I would create a legal entity for that group, and if they're not willing to do that, maybe we don't want to host that event. Now, there are some situations where our city says, you know what, this is something we really believe in, and we are going to host the event of the city. But just be warned that you have taken that risk on yourself, and as such, you need to be far more involved. So if the city or the county or the district takes this event on, you need to own the event, which basically means you need to run it and ensure that it's being operated safely and correctly. Okay. All right. So planning events. We probably all experienced this where we've sat in a meeting, probably in March, and it was a planning meeting for next summer's event. You probably each have one big town days, one big event that you do, or maybe you've got 2 or 3, but there's normally one big event, and you get a community group together, and there are some people that are volunteering, and they want to help out. They want to make this the best event that you've ever had, and somebody utters this phrase, you know what'd be awesome? Here's what we ought to do. Those words are always make me a little bit nervous because we always want to go bigger, better, more exciting, and sometimes that's where we get into unacceptable risks. So we need to decide what is our appetite for risk early on, and we need to stick to it. Even if somebody comes in, even if the mayor comes in and says, you know what'd be awesome? We need to be prepared and say, this is something that's beyond what our acceptable risk is, and let's talk about why we want to do that. Otherwise, we end up with some scenarios where bad things can happen. Oh, I apologize. I thought I had turned the volume down on this. I don't know if the volume's coming through. We also want to look at our coverage for our events. Throwing out the candy over the soccer field. Isn't it great that everything is caught on video now? But that's a terrible end to a happy event, and that one happened right here in the state of Utah, where an aircraft crashed into a field full of spectators that were just there for a fun time. So let's ask ourselves ahead of time, are there things that we just shouldn't do? Are there things that are not specifically covered or are specifically excluded from our insurance coverage? And the trust policy, just like any insurance policy out there, specifically excludes certain activities, and that's to prevent all of the members of the trust from taking on undue risk. Okay? There are certain things that governmental entities just shouldn't do. So we ask about that, is it covered? And so there are certain things that are specifically excluded, and they are for a reason. Aircraft is a risky activity. Anytime we have a flying contraption, that is something that can be really risky. Rebound devices, including trampolines and bouncy houses, are also specifically excluded. Mechanical amusement rides also fall into that category. And you say, well, we have bouncy houses. Why is that specifically excluded? Well, it's a higher level of risk, and so we exclude that to keep people's premiums low, our members' premiums low. And then if you want that coverage, then we can arrange for that coverage. But there is definitely a better way to do that than taking that risk on yourself. There are other coverages that you can get, event cancellations, things like that we can definitely write for you. But things like bouncy houses, they're not particularly dangerous because of kids bouncing around. That's maybe one of those inherent risks. Kids will bonk their heads, they'll fall down and get a boo-boo. But the problem with bouncy houses is sometimes the wind picks them up and they blow away with kids still in them. And there have been several situations where kids have fallen out of bouncy houses that were several hundred feet above the air, or above the ground, up in the air. And so that's the reason why some of those things are specifically excluded and why we have to have good controls in place. So you ask yourself, let me go back to that bouncy house thing. You say, well, how do I go about doing this without getting coverage through the trust? Well, that's how we can bring in a contractor, bring a reputable contractor in as part of the event and have them provide coverage for you. Once again, get them to provide you a certificate of insurance, naming you as an additional insured, ensure that it is specific for the type of activity that they're doing, and it has reasonable limits. What are reasonable limits? Well, it really depends on the activity that they're doing. If we've got an organizer coming in and putting on a demolition derby for us, that's obviously going to have much higher limits than the craft fair. Okay. All right. So ask yourself tough questions. Can we realistically do this activity that we're planning? Can we legally do it? There are certain things like fireworks that have legal restrictions on who can shoot off fireworks, who can purchase those, and there are some entities around the state that say, hey, we've got a fire department, they can light off fireworks. Well, if they've never done that before, that's probably not a responsible activity for you to take under your organization's wing. They need to be trained, and they need to, there's a certified pyrotechnician certification, and that's really what we should be looking at. That means they need to attend a class, and they also need to undergo or assist with some shoots prior to supervising their own shoots. Okay. You know, anytime we look at activities that are potentially risky, like fireworks, we need to have somebody that understands what the risk is and understands the proper controls for that. There have been some rough situations that have happened throughout the state, both with fires and explosions and fireworks. Mass gatherings, anytime we bring a ton of people together, those are riskier than a small gathering. And there are also specific legal requirements for that. Of course, I have to put videos in of explosions going wrong or fireworks going wrong. Okay. We already talked about this on fireworks. So just on fireworks, so you say, well, it's a lot cheaper to have the fire department shoot these off. Take a look at getting your firefighters certified as certified shooters, and some of the controls that go into that. And in many cases, hiring a contractor begins to look better and better because they come in with their own certificate of insurance. We have a good contract with them, and it can protect us. Okay. All right. Mass gatherings. Once again, there's a state law that governs this. Anytime we have over 500 attendees, we need to provide proper sanitation, first aid, and that first aid is pretty detailed. What you have to have, and in most cases, it looks to me as I read the law like you need to have an ambulance on site if you have this mass gathering. Now, don't quote me on that, but as I read it, it talks about AEDs and some of the other first aid equipment that we need, and it looks to me like having an ambulance is definitely the easiest way to do that. So, risky events, things like demolition derbies, and even parades can be risky events. So, what type of? I thought I had volume down on this. So parades, I'm the guy raining on the parade today. Everybody loves a parade, but parades definitely have some potential for some bad problems, and that has been highlighted over the last few years, where there have been numerous fatalities, even in the state of Utah, in parades. And so I just want to offer some advice and some rules about parades that I hope will prevent those fatalities or serious accidents from happening. Number one rule, and this is where fatalities happen regularly, are with floats and pickups pulling trailers. So here's a simple rule that you can adopt in your parades. If you have pickups or cars pulling trailers, nobody can ride in the back of the truck if they're pulling a trailer. Because what happens is people get excited and somebody's riding in the back of the truck and they want to get to the trailer, or they're in the trailer and they want to get to the back of the truck and they step on the tongue and they slip off and go under the wheels, and the driver's not paying attention, they don't have communication, and you know, a very heavy trailer a lot of times will cause instant death or serious injury. This is a simple rule. Nobody riding in the bed of a truck if there's a trailer behind. Here's another rule. Nobody can enter or exit floats after the parade starts. Just set a hard and fast rule, and if people don't obey it, throw them out. Just say, we're not going to kill a kid, we're not going to hurt somebody as part of our happy event that we've got going on. So we're going to be really strict on this one. So nobody gets off, nobody gets on a float or whatever that vehicle is during the parade. Here's another one, throwing some rain on the parade. Candy should only be distributed from walkers. Don't throw candy from floats or trailers or trucks. And you ask why? Kids get really excited at parades, and they like that candy, and they run around, they run to get it, and some of that candy doesn't go exactly where we plan on it going, and so they can run in underneath the tires, and the driver may not see them at all until it's too late. This is a pretty simple rule. if participants in your parade want to distribute candy, they can have some people walk along the side. What this does for us as well is it also helps us to keep those kids back. And so those walkers will walk out on the perimeter of the road and ensure that those people go back. And if the kids start getting too far out, you throw the candy behind them, and then they go back. Inspect the floats. Take a look. And I know a lot of times these events are kind of last minute. People are throwing things together. I remember my high school homecoming parade, where there was a group of us that we said, "Hey, we need a float for the parade." And so I took my CJ5 Jeep and a little trailer that I had that shouldn't have had people riding on it, and I hooked it on behind, and we put about 20 people between the Jeep and the trailer, and we had a good old time, and we didn't have any injuries, but that was ripe for problems given that situation. Oh, good question. So, question: what are you looking for when you inspect them? A number of things. One, just general things. You don't want to have any wheels that are protruding, anything that could cause somebody to be entrapped and go under a wheel. We want to look at the height of the float. If I've got a really tall float and I have people standing on top of it, is there a chance I'm going to come within 10 feet of overhead power lines? There have been a number of situations where a float has contacted power lines and people have been electrocuted just while riding on a float. I would look for things like open flames, generators. Sometimes we have a night parade, or they'll have some lights on the parade. Be aware of those things, both from a flammability aspect as well as potential for carbon monoxide exposure. Not that you're responsible for each one of these things, but if you can see with something that is risky, then you want to point those things out. And if they have something that is super risky, don't allow them to be in the parade. Other things to look for are animals, and I would take a real hard look at what type of animals we allow in our parades. That horse that is pulling the buggy may be really calm and collected out on the farm, but when you put thousands of people around it and sirens blaring and people throwing candy and you name all of the other distractions that could cause an animal to panic, that gets to be pretty risky. And I wasn't able to download I've got a video that is really good showing a horse and buggy going berserk through a parade and injured. It's in Iowa, I believe, and they injured dozens of people by this happening. So think really closely about how we do that. I'm not saying no animals in your parade, but think about what types of animals. And if you see a horse is spooked and not, everybody's lining up for the parade, and these animals are not behaving themselves, boy, take an audible and say, you know what, this isn't safe for our parade today. Why don't we do something different? Lots of things to inspect those for, and I'll see if I can put together a list and send that out just due to time. Communication, that's communication from you to the participants. Let them know what your rules are ahead of time. So we don't have any, we want everybody to be happy. We want them to come having an appropriate float, come having people prepared for this so nobody gets their feelings hurt. So that communication is really important. And on that communication as well, if you have trucks and trailers or maybe a float where somebody is driving it from inside, you want some way to communicate from the driver to those participating on the float or the trailer. So if something goes wrong, you can have that communication. That can be as simple as a cheap pair of walkie-talkies. And this last one, really don't take any guff. This is a voluntary thing, and we want to set some reasonable rules for the parade so everybody can have fun. We don't want to make it a not a fun parade, but we also don't want to kill a little kid. We don't want to have a really bad scenario happening there. If somebody's out there, doing burnouts, or they've got an ATV and they're ripping around, don't hesitate to say, you know what, why don't you apply next year to come into our parade, and we'll work with you then if you can make your behavior a little better. Things that can get out of hand, don't allow those in the parades. Okay. All right. Lots of questions. So running the event, I've got to move. We've got to decide who's responsible. I recommend using the instant command system. And if you have a fire department or a police department that is part of your organization, or even if they're not, talk to them about the instant command system. Most of you have taken the FEMA training on instant command, but it's a command and control structure that designates how we run the event. So we have a clear chain of command and proper communication. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best, and then we'll have a good time. Some accountability. I would always designate an event safety officer. Have somebody that is specifically charged with the safety of the event, but also challenge each of the volunteers and employees that if you see something that's not right, you've got to take action. We need to do some inspections. Regular inspections of our facilities. If it's a fairgrounds, if it's a soccer field, get out and look at those things and inspect and make sure they're okay. Fix things. If something gets broken, do we have the equipment and the personnel to be able to fix that? If not, do we have the ability to restrict people's access to whatever it was that broke? What happens? What if something bad happens? Ask yourself the question, what's the worst that could happen in this event? And then plan for those terrible events that you think about so we're prepared. How do we control crowds? How do we provide security? Many events are great when they start out, but something goes horribly wrong, and people try to make a quick exit of that event. We've got to have a plan of how to get people in and out. That was one of the things with the Olympics that I think we did particularly well, was we controlled people, and we had options for them. If they didn't want to ride the shuttle buses, we had a way that they could walk to their car, and we kept those safe. I attended a concert this last summer with my wife, and she told me after, she's, "We're never coming here again." And the organizer, this venue, did a terrible job of controlling the crowds and egress from the facility. We had a great time getting to the concert and watching the concert, but trying to get out was a nightmare, and it was really unsafe. And so we've got to think about those things. And what if everybody's got to get out of there really fast? All right, we talk about inspections. We look front of house, back of house, all of these things. Sometimes we bring in temporary power. We bring in other temporary resources to provide utilities, water, electrical, you name it. Those can cause risks, and so we've got to inspect for those things. Don't put those things where they can be easily accessed, particularly by children. Look for trip hazards and other things like that. And here's an important rule. Inspections don't happen from the truck. A drive-by isn't going to cut it. We need to get out and walk around our facilities and look specifically for those things. I'm going along here, but I got to tell a story, an Olympic story. I was doing an inspection of facilities. We were just a month or so out from the Olympics happening, and we had a lot of temporary structures going up, grandstands and the like. And I had inspected one of these, and it was up at the Utah Olympic Park where the ski jumps were. And the back side of this, the top of it, the hill actually fell away from behind the grandstands, and so it was probably close to 200-foot drop off of the back of the grandstands. And I walked up to the top, and I'm looking all over that, and I found the handrails at the top had not been secured. They were just set into some pipes, but if you lifted them up, they would come out. And so I shut down the construction. I said, we can't go forward until this is fixed, and along with a number of other things. And I got a call from it wasn't Mitt, but the other guy in charge, who you may recognize in the current Olympic movement. Fraser Bullock called me up, and he was not very happy. And he says, "You the guy that shut this down?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Where are you?" And I was right there. And he says, "Good, I'll be there in just a minute." Well, I could see my career passing before my eyes. And, and he says, "What are you talking about?" And I walked him up to the top of the grandstands, and I grabbed a hold of the handrail and I lifted it out, and exposing a 200-foot fall. And he says, "Oh, we got to fix that." And then the conversation was a little bit different. So inspect, identify these things before they become a problem, and take action. It was a pretty simple fix. We simply put some bolts in and made those same handrails safe. It's always good to document our playground inspections, field inspections, and just a general facility inspection. If it isn't written down, it never happened unless it's bad. So what do we document? Good things and bad things. When we document a bad thing, we also want to document the correction that we did. If I fix something, I want to write that down as well. We want to document training people. That's both employees and volunteers. We want to document incidents when they happen. If I have a complaint from the public, write it down and write down what we did to address that. Any actions that we take. Sometimes we want to bring the police in because we get good documentation if the police are involved. There's going to be a police report that comes out of any police interaction. What about liability waivers? This is a real common question that we get. Can we just, we want to have people do flaming bungee jump. If we just have them sign a waiver, are we okay? And the answer is waivers have limited protection. These things are not going to stand up in most courts. They will be thrown out pretty quickly, especially if a minor is involved. That being said, I'm not telling you not to do waivers. I think they have some value in our operations, because what it does is it tells the participant we're trying to transfer that risk. They're identifying, you know what, I knew they had me sign that thing. I knew when I signed up for the mutton busting. This is my daughter, by the way, mutton busting champion. When I signed, actually my wife signed that liability waiver for Beth prior to mutton busting. We said, you know what, we're accepting that risk because I got 5 kids. I got one to spare. No, I love Beth. She's good, and she's a mutton busting champion. But it told me and it told my wife that we own some of that risk. So waivers, while they're not perfect, they can help us out. Okay, some specifics about event. Let's go through and talk about security. Well, we're just a quiet little town. We don't need law enforcement here for our event. Well, I'm sorry. We all need to wake up. It's a different time, and we can have a big problem wherever we are. No matter how big or small our event is, we can have some issues. So we need to have a security plan. Does that mean I need to have law enforcement at every one of these events? No. But if I have a mass gathering of people, yeah, probably so. Control access. How do we keep people out of places they're not supposed to be? How do we close a facility if a problem happens to it? So that plan needs to be in place ahead of time. Communications, let people know through signage or other means what's expected of them, what is forbidden, what to do if things go wrong in their operations. Response plans for specific things. So if you have athletic events or rodeos, whatever it may be, some event like this where we're bringing a bunch of people together that are outdoors, we should have a lightning policy, a lightning hold policy that says how we identify if lightning is in the area and what we do. This picture I took actually at a county fair where I was sitting there, and this was taken during a lightning hold policy. And did I get up off of those metal bleachers and go to my car to be safe from the lightning? No, because then my seat would be wet by the time I got back. But because the county made this notification and told me we're going into a lightning hold policy, there's lightning in the area, folks. Folks, this is potentially dangerous. We recommend you go to your cars. At that point, I took it on myself. I said, I don't want a wet butt. I'll take a chance on dying of lightning strike. All right. On these policies, don't recreate the wheel. You don't have to reinvent all of these things. These policies exist in a lot of organizations around the state, and you can give them a call and say, hey, can we happen to plagiarize your lightning hold policy? And I think they'll be happy to share in most cases. All right, what do we do if there's an accident? We have to plan and train our people on that ahead of time so they know what to do. Ask yourself the question, who can speak to the press? Something bad happens, press is going to be crawling all over looking for one of your employees and volunteers to give them information. So our people need to be trained on who can speak to the press, and we need to train people, have a trained public information officer, and train everybody on who that is. So if the press comes up and says, hey, what happened? Hey, I can't speak to the press. However, Joe Blow is our public information officer. You can contact him at this number or at this location, and that gets them off the hot seat, and it also gets the appropriate message out. Why do we want to speak with the press? Well, if we don't tell the story, somebody will. And generally, it's going to be Cletus that they find walking down the street talking about the last time the flood happened or whatever it was. Collect information. If we have an event and somebody gets injured, we should be collecting information, even if they say, "Oh, I'm not going to sue. I'm not worried about that." At least get a minimal level of information, so we know what happened and we document those things. Teach your employees and volunteers to take a picture of the general scene, of the equipment involved, those types of things, so we have good documentation. And if we just a couple of things on that, don't admit fault. Even if we think we're at fault, don't admit fault, because we may not know all of the specifics of why this happened. If there's a problem with a piece of our equipment and somebody was injured, people say, well, I better not fix that, or that's admitting guilt, right? That's admitting we're at fault. No, fix it. Get it fixed. We have some protection under the law for making those repairs, but don't let another accident happen. Fix those problems, and then prepare a response. If we have an incident that is critical or has potential for litigation, prepare a response. Submit that to the appropriate people in your organization, and that probably includes legal counsel, so they can review it ahead of time. Start a claim. If we have one that looks like, hey, there's going to be a problem here, time is of the essence to get that information to claims adjusters so we can gather information and prepare our defense. All right, volunteer liability, and I throw this in along with employees as well. We want to qualify our volunteers, make sure that they're physically capable of doing the tasks that we're asking them to do, and also that they don't have anything else that would hold them back from doing that or place us at risk. So that would involve doing background checks. How do I do that? I've already gone long on this presentation today, but just know that if you go onto our webinar recordings, I have a specific webinar on background checks and how to do that. But anybody that is placed in one of these positions of responsibilities where they're dealing with minors or vulnerable populations of people, seniors or people with diminished mental capacities, Have those people background checked, and there's specific laws and rules that go along with that. Also check their motor vehicle records. Even if they're a volunteer, we don't want somebody out there that has a revoked driver's license, or they got a DUI last week. We don't want them driving for us. So have them give you a driver's license number, send that to us at the trust, and we'll send you back an MVR for those folks. Train and supervise those people. Even if they're a volunteer, we still need to supervise, and we need to correct them if they're doing things inappropriately. And cover them, protect those folks, and help them as a manager should when they're put in a difficult situation. Here's just a couple of things. Sometimes we run into service projects, Eagle projects, or otherwise that may place us at risk or bring some risk into our facilities. Get involved with these things. See what the project plan, look at the materials, the staffing. Not that you're over these things, but if you're going to end up inheriting this Eagle project when it's all said and done, you should know what's going on and have some protection there. Do I ask the scouts for a certificate of insurance? I would. Okay. Sometimes we have crazy things happen that all bets are off. A few years ago, the Rainbow family had their annual gathering up in Wasatch County. And this is a disorganized group, even though they're probably an organization there. They deny that there's any organization, and nobody wants to be sued or nobody wants to be held accountable. And they just put out a notice and say, hey, we're going to this campground or this forest somewhere in the West generally, and they just move in. And they don't have a mass gathering plan, and they don't have sanitation plans very much. So if this happens in your community, share information. Call up the folks up at Wasatch County and say, how did you guys deal with this when they showed up? Build a plan ahead. These guys normally announce this way ahead. I was going to check that this morning and I forgot to check out the Rainbow family's plans for this year. But take action and get prepared. This can be a real impact on communities, because a lot of times they come into small communities that can be affected even more. All right, and they may not have the resources to be able to deal with it. So just in summary, plan for your success. That's the key to this, is planning ahead, building your programs, and getting people trained up and ready to go, getting your equipment in place. Know what your hazards are. Know what your facilities are. Inspect. Get out and look at those things. Take action and document those things when we do anything really out there, and it can be simple documentation. Okay, sorry I went long. I knew I would. This is a giant subject. I know there may be a lot of questions on this. You can type those into the chat box or the Q&A box, and please feel free to call myself, Doug, or Brent, and we'd be happy to talk you through these things and look through plans and that, and give you some ideas from our angle of what we think might be problems and some controls for you. All right, now see questions. Doug and Brent, what did I miss?
Jason, I just add, you kind of touched on it when you're talking about parades just a little bit and the trucks towing trailers, but I would add that any special event, and maybe not even special events, but even just in your employment practices in general, that if you've got volunteers, participants, employees, make sure if you're doing any kind of transportation with them that they have a seat with a seat belt, or if it's a vehicle, may not have seat belts like a bus or something, but make sure people have a seat. We've had really severe injuries, both on workers' compensation as well as associated with special events, when some people are riding in the back of a pickup truck and they get bounced out, or they're hanging on or riding on the outside of a vehicle and they fall off. So just that needs to be another real hard and fast rule, that you don't have people riding, or you're not transporting people in the back of a truck or on the outside of a vehicle.
Yeah, really good point, Doug. That's something we've just got to make a hard and fast rule on that, because we've had some near fatalities from people falling out of the back of those vehicles. So, anything else? All right. I don't see questions because I think people said you went too long. So I will be sending out some information from this, and we recorded this session, and so we'll place it up on our website as soon as IT gets it there. If you've got questions or comments on this, please give us a call, send us an email. We appreciate all the work that you do out there. Go out and have fun, but be safe.